Okay, so for today, we're going to be going back to Duna again on a one-way trip this time. We're going to be taking a big rover. It'll be a roving base that'll basically stay on Duna. We're also going to be using some new parts from some new mods that I've installed, and I've only somewhat figured out how to use them. The main reason that I decided to do a rover today, namely a one to Duna, which is, if you remember, is the Kerbal Space Program's analog for Mars, is that today the Perseverance rover actually successfully touched down on Mars, so that was kind of a big deal, and I thought I'd do something that was at least remotely on theme. Another thing I should mention is that I was also planning on doing a mission to go into low Earth orbit with some mods for this game, but unfortunately I had a bunch of issues with graphic mods that basically made it so that once you got above like 400 meters off the surface, like the entire like launch pad would be swallowed up by water, so I eventually decided to just scrap that and go with a mission to Duna, since in light of all this stuff with the Perseverance rover. All that said, what you can see me building here is actually the rover itself, so you can see I've started designing it in the spaceplane hangar, unlike normal, just because since it's placed horizontally, that sort of gives me a better idea of what it's going to look like on the ground. So you can see in the back there, I've got a cargo bay full of experiments, and you know, this is a sandbox playthrough, so we don't have to worry about like collecting science or funds or anything, but to be honest, rovers, much like space stations, don't really serve a lot of purpose in this game other than just the fun of sending it there. So I've decided to at least give it some even pretend practical use. As for the rest of the bay, most of the other compartments on there are just aesthetics. You can see that one little cabin there with the windows. That's supposed to be a little habitation area where the Kerbals would live and eat and sleep, in addition to the cockpit in the front. And I've also added some sort of vertically placed rockets on the side, and I'm trying to right now get the center of mass to align so that whenever I fire those, it's not pushing the rocket too far towards one side. At this point, it's also worth mentioning that since this is a mod, not everything works properly, and you'll see later in the video whenever we're actually landing on Duna, I have some issues with action groups where once I place the wheels on here, you'll see they can be retracted and then deployed. I pressed the deploy button, or the action group, to deploy the wheels, and they just didn't work, so I valiantly spammed it like 5 times, and eventually that worked. So there's definitely, if I continue to use this mod, there's going to be some other issues that'll probably prop up. This is, by the way, like my 5th time recording this. I was originally intending to do a mission to Lathe, but the rockets I was designing ended up being just these completely enormous monstrosities, and I couldn't come up with anything that looked good, and it barely functioned, so I decided to just scrap the whole idea after like 3.5 hours of trying to design this ship, which was not easy to do, but I eventually decided, I remembered, hey, there's the whole like rover thing happening today, so I decided to go with this. The mod I'm using for this actually is called Colonization, and it doesn't just add rover stuff. You can see there's another new like 5 tabs in the bottom left there that has a bunch of new stuff you can set up for like permanent colonies, and I might get into that later. I do hope to visit some new planets before I start setting up bases in other places, but I'm thinking our first bit of like solar system infrastructure will be this rover, and well, I guess there was the Minmus base that I built a couple weeks ago, but this one's definitely a lot more complex, and I think if we're going to be sending any more rockets with permanent like assets to stay there, then it's probably going to be things along the lines of like rovers and space planes that can move around. Anyways, as you can see now, we've moved from the spaceplane hangar to the vehicle assembly bay, and we're going to go ahead and place the entire rover on its backside vertically, and we're going to go ahead and start constructing the fairing around it. And the way you have to design rovers is kind of strange, particularly with the fairings, because they're so oblong, and then you also have to fit the nuclear stage in this, which after having been frustrated with the attempts to make the Lathe ship, I had just kept ending up with these massive rockets, so this being recorded right after that ended up with me still in that mindset. So I created this like enormous ship that probably had like 4,500 meters per second of delta V more than it needed, because I was able to get well into orbit with the first two stages, and I was almost able to get all the way to Duna with the second stage. In fact, the rocket you see me building right now is probably closer in delta V requirements to something that you'd see go to probably like Elu, at least for the mothership. But since this isn't a return mission and the rover's there to stay with some Kerbals rather than doing the Apollo-style missions that we normally do on return trips, we don't have to worry about the weight of a lander, but that is replaced with a lot of dry mass. So I figured that would require a lot more delta V than it did, but here we are. So for the interplanetary / orbital stage, I've decided to go with one Rhino engine and two of the medium fuel tanks. The Earth's like 3.75 meter in diameter fuel tanks. And something really annoying I've noticed that started happening is the Kerbal Engineer Redux I use in the top right has been glitching out lately. I'm not really sure why, but it'll just give me completely incorrect readings, and it'll say like I have way less delta V than I do. Also, you'll notice on screen the vehicle assembly bay just disappeared. That's part of a mod I'm using. It basically extends the vehicle assembly building, makes it way wider and way taller so that I can build some of these bigger rockets, even though, again, I made this one way bigger than it needed to be. But I use this mod a lot with the real solar system mod, since these Kerbal scale rockets are way smaller than the real ones. But going back to my original point, the issue I was having with the Kerbal Engineer Redux, I think, is caused, again, I'm not sure, but I think it's caused by me designing the lander first instead of the mothership, or at least placing the cockpit of the lander first. So I think the calculation for the amount of delta V in the craft is just incorrect, so I'll need to start doing, it's a simple fix, but I'll just need to start building the mothership first, or just turning it upside down. But that's the bulk of the rocket build, and we will go ahead and start rearranging our staging on the right to make sure everything is correct, rename the rocket, and get ready to launch. And we have liftoff. So basically, given the size of this payload, we're going to be taking a slightly less aggressive angle of attack than normal. Whereas with smaller payloads to places like Minmus and the Mun, and we've got this giant rover this time, rather than point what we normally do, which is 45 degrees at 10 kilometers, this time we shoot to be pointing 45 degrees around 20 kilometers, and I still hit it a little early there, but it's mostly fine. So for the bottom stage, we've got one Mammoth engine flanked by now two gone Clydesdale engines, which are solid rocket motors. And so again, we're going to be going for a pretty high orbit because our given the thrust to weight ratio of our interplanetary stage, which is pretty low, we're going to have to be burning nearly radial in once we're trying to do our ejection burn. So taking that into account, we're going to go for a much higher orbit than we would normally go to, again, for somewhere like Minmus or the Mun with a much smaller payload. I put a little more fuel in this stage than necessary, so we actually end up using some of this stage's fuel to do our ejection burn, which normally causes problems, but what I did for this mission was I went ahead and made it so that the rover was correctly attached to the bottom interplanetary stage, so that it didn't require any mid-burn reconfiguration, which allows us to just drop the ascension stage and continue on with the nuclear engines as soon as they're detached. As per usual, you can see I've already gone ahead and plotted my ejection burn, so we will just warp to the dark side of the planet and begin burning with that ascension stage. And then you can see here, as soon as it's out of fuel, we just eject it and begin burning with the nuclear engines. And normally, I'm getting kind of sick of using these nuclear engines. Their thrust to weight ratio is so low, and recently I've been having some issues with the maneuver node maker, where it will just flat out lie to me and tell me that whenever I complete this burn at this time, it will end up, it will actually have our real burn after we've completed it much shorter than it indicates. And I think I might just, at this point, I might just end up uninstalling and probably maybe reinstalling the Kerbal Redux mod, but that's just been causing a lot of problems lately because I think it might be related to that, but we'll see. Since this is a one-way trip, we're not going to have to worry about getting all the way back to Kerbin, which I think is part of why I completely forgot I was doing a one-way trip while I was designing the rocket, so I'm pretty sure that's why I made the interplanetary stage so big. But you can see us coming into Duna's atmosphere here, and we're just going to ditch that interplanetary stage and let the heat shield on the front of the rover there, it will inflate, and we will let that take care of all of the slowing down necessary. And I can see here, I guess there's a glitch going on or something because the reason for those solar panels is to provide electric charge, obviously. It's not just cosmetic. And somehow we were still able to maneuver the rover with no electric charge. So again, I just guess just a glitch, but whatever. So you can see the heat shield is now inflated, and you can see I completely forgot that I put an RCS port on the front of the rover for this reason. You can see the top, like, half of the back end of the rover is completely sticking out. But I remembered, like, halfway through the descent, so you can see we've already done most of our slowing down, so if anything was going to break off, it would have been then. So truth be told, this heat shield might not have even been necessary, but it was helpful definitely to have to make sure that we got captured on our first time around Duna, and it I don't know, maybe if I'd forgotten the solar panels were out or something. So you can see our surface speed now quickly going down and continue using those RCS ports to keep us pointed forward. And now you're going to see me go ahead and detach the heat shield, and it kind of spun the thing out like crazy for a minute. But anyways, in a second here, we're going to go ahead and deploy the drogue and then main parachutes. And something I forgot while designing this was, while I made sure that the engines were pointing correctly relative to the center of mass, I forgot to do the same with the parachutes, which led to this pretty rough landing. And so we ever so gently smashed the front of the rover into Duna's surface, but we've applied the brakes and successfully landed, so we will go ahead and finally deploy the landing gear, which wouldn't go down like I mentioned earlier, but we open up the antennas and decide to take this thing for a little drive. You can see the Kerbal's point of view here, so this is what they would see inside the little cockpit in the front there. And we'll just basically drive around for a little bit and see what we can see, and just to make sure that the rover does work. And sure enough, the modded wheels work fine, and I'm pretty sure most of the things I put on here were modded. But anyways, we will go ahead and have all of our Kerbals hop out, and we'll have a little Kerbal here run over to the back and try and open the doors just to look inside. With one of the new updates to Kerbal Space Program, they actually added some little deployable science kits, where basically you can store them inside. You can store them inside these little storage containers, one of which is mounted to the top right under the antenna. And you can see I try and grab some of the stuff out of there, but unfortunately, these little deployable science kits are too heavy for Jeb to carry, and he actually can't carry it with a jetpack and parachute on. And so I got rid of the parachute, but it was still too heavy. So anyways, I decided to just go ahead and have all of our Kerbals hop out and come stand here so get a good thumbnail. And so I think that'll do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do for the next one, but this mission was definitely a fun one, hopefully on theme. But yeah, I guess that's about it. See ya.